The twins were screaming again. Not the kind of scream that pierced the ears worse. It was the voiceless kind. Mouths wide open, tears streaming, fists clenched, but no sound. No words. No laughter. Just the stormy rhythm of tiny feet, pounding the marble floors of a house too big for grieving hearts. Clarissa Holt, one of the youngest and most successful tech CEOs in America, stood in the hallway of her sprawling Connecticut estate, her back pressed against the cool wall. Her tailored red blazer was soaked through beneath her arms, not from rain, but from sweat and helplessness. She had just fired her 12th nanny in less than 5 months. "I'm sorry, Ms. Holt. I've worked with children for 20 years. But those girls, they don't want love. They want war." That had been the final words of Greta, a retired child therapist who had left in tears this morning, her coat half-buttoned hair pulled from its clip by one of the twins in a silent tantrum. Clarissa slid to the floor slowly, her knees folding beneath her like a marionette with strings cut. The mahogany hallway, the crystal chandelier above the grand piano collecting dust in the parlor, it all felt like a museum of a life she no longer lived. She didn't cry. Clarissa Holt had stopped crying the day her husband's helicopter disappeared off the coast of Naples. That was 17 months ago. The day she buried him, her twin daughters Ella and Sophie stopped speaking altogether. Since then, silence had taken over the Holt estate. Not the peaceful kind, the heavy kind, the kind that suffocated. Until now. From the baby monitor still clutched in her hand, a sound broke the silence. Not a cry, not a scream, a laugh. Short, delicate, almost unsure of itself, but real. Clarissa's heart stopped. She looked at the monitor. She replayed the audio. Then she ran. She ran through the marble corridor past the white double doors and into the nursery, and there, like something out of a fever dream, stood a man she had never seen before. He wasn't wearing a suit or khakis like the previous nannies. He wore an old, faded green military jacket frayed at the edges. His long brown hair curled slightly over his shoulders. His posture was relaxed, yet grounded, the kind only war veterans and country dancers shared. Strapped to his back in a soft white cloth sling were her daughters Ella and Sophie, and they were giggling, not screaming, not scratching, not retreating. Giggling. The man turned, slightly catching Clarissa in his peripheral vision, without startling the girls. He gave her a nod, calm, confident, knowing. Then he did something absurd. He danced. Right there in the middle of the nursery, still carrying both girls on his back, he took a light step to the side, spun gently, then another. It wasn't choreography. It was rhythm. It was human. The girls followed his movement like tide follows the moon. Clarissa felt her knees weaken. She wasn't breathing. "Who are you?" she whispered, not trusting her own voice. The man smiled, warm and boyish. "Ray Dalton," he said softly. "I saw the listing online. No one answered the door, so I figured I'd let the rhythm do the knocking. If this scene stirred something inside you, a memory, a question, a feeling, you're not alone. Leave a comment below. Have you ever seen someone heal others with nothing but kindness? And if you're just as curious about Ray Dalton as Clarissa is, stay with us. This dance has only just begun." Clarissa Holt had built empires with code and led thousands through innovation. But she had no idea what to do with this man. "Why are they not afraid of you?" she asked, still barely believing her own eyes. Ray gently stepped to the beat of the music playing from a small speaker on the shelf. A soft, acoustic melody, old John Denver maybe. He didn't stop dancing. "They're not afraid of people," he said. "They're afraid of the quiet." Clarissa felt her throat tighten. The room had been filled with so much silence for so long, it had become a language of its own. "She used to sing," Clarissa murmured, her eyes locked on Ella. Before, Ray looked at her gently. Then she still remembers. He lowered himself slowly to the floor, allowing the twins to slide down his back like soft sacks of flour. They curled beside him, clinging to the sides of his jacket like ivy. She smiled. Clarissa whispered. She needed permission, Ray replied. Kids don't forget how to laugh. They just forget they're allowed to. That night, Clarissa watched the surveillance footage of the nursery over and over again. She turned down a Zoom meeting with the board. She turned off the news. She turned off everything except the video. 2 girls, a man, and a dance that no one else had ever dared to try. And for the first time in 17 months, the woman who had forgotten how to cry felt her heart move again. The Dalton house wasn't much, just a weathered little cottage tucked behind a grove of birch trees at the end of a dirt road that hadn't seen pavement in decades. The fence leaned, the roof creaked in the wind, but the windows always glowed warm at sundown, and from inside came the unmistakable sound of something rare. Joy. Ray Dalton stood barefoot in the middle of the living room, a dish rag slung over one shoulder and a saucepan in one hand. The music was already playing. Not loud, not perfect. Just reel an old John Denver tune, looping quietly from a second-hand speaker with a fading sticker that read, "Property of U.S. Navy." Sitting cross-legged on the braided rug was Lily, his 6-year-old daughter. She cradled a tiny ukulele in her lap, the same one Ray had traded a toolbox for at a flea market 2 years ago. Her brows furrowed in deep concentration as her small fingers worked the strings. "Start again from G, Ray," said gently, tapping the beat on the floor with the handle of the pan. "Feel it in your knees." Lily gave a theatrical sigh, the kind only 6-year-olds can make sound, both dramatic and endearing. Then she adjusted her grip and began again, soft, off-key, but with heart. Ray didn't care for perfection. He cared for presence. He watched his daughter, the way a man watches a fire on a cold night, not trying to control it, just grateful it burns. There was music in her, not taught, but remembered like something passed down in blood and bone. Her mother had been like that too. Emily. Ray's throat tightened. She died 3 winters ago. One moment she was tucking Lily into bed with a lullaby. The next, she was gone. A drunk driver, a black ice curve, a silence so deep it swallowed the music from their home for months, until one day, Lily, at only 4 years old, had walked up to him, holding that ukulele with both hands, and said, "Daddy, maybe I can play for you now." He had collapsed onto the floor and wept like a soldier, with no war left to fight. Now, Lily strummed her clumsy little melody with fierce determination. She wasn't playing for a crowd. She was playing for herself. For him. For Emily. For the light that refused to die. Outside, the wind rustled the last of autumn's leaves. The sun filtered in through the windows, laying soft amber shadows across the floor. The whole room danced in light. Ray finally set the pan down, walked over, and dropped to his knees beside Lily. "Close your eyes," he said. She looked up at him, confused but trusting. She obeyed. He placed one large hand over her small one on the neck of the ukulele and guided her fingers into position. "Now just breathe. Don't worry about the notes. Play like you're telling me a story without words." Lily nodded slowly. Then she played. The sound wasn't perfect, but it didn't need to be. It had soul. Ray closed his own eyes, and without even thinking, his body started to sway. A slow rhythm, back and forth, like rocking on the waves of a memory. His foot tapped the hardwood floor gently. The music flowed, not from the speaker, not from the strings, but from somewhere deeper. This is what he had come home from the war to do, not to fight. not to forget, but to dance again with his daughter, with grief, with life. Later that evening, they sat on the porch steps, sharing a bowl of soup that Lily had helped stir. She was wrapped in a quilt that once belonged to her mother, and Ray had a cup of black coffee growing cold in his hands. "Do you think Mom can hear us when we play?" Lily asked suddenly, her voice small and honest. Ray looked out toward the trees, their branches silhouetted against a bruised sky. "I think," he said softly, "that when we play with love, she's right here." He touched a hand to his heart. Lily didn't respond. She just leaned her head against his arm, the quilt slipping slightly to one side, exposing the frayed edge of her flannel pajama top. In that moment, Ray knew two things with absolute certainty. First, the ache of loss would never fully leave them. Second, it didn't have to not if they kept dancing. Inside the house still smelled like soup and cinnamon. The ukulele rested against the wall. The tiny speaker blinked softly, waiting for its next cue. Ray stood at the doorway, watching his daughter drift off to sleep on the porch beside him. He had never wanted much in life, not medals, not recognition. Just this, a life where joy was still possible after pain. What he didn't know yet, what he couldn't possibly imagine, was that somewhere across town, in a house much bigger and quieter than his, another pair of small hands were curled into fists. Another mother sat in silence, and another storm was brewing in the hearts of children who had forgotten how to smile. Ray didn't know that his rhythm, his dance, would one day be the melody that broke that silence. But for now, he reached down, pulled the quilt higher around Lily's shoulders, and whispered a promise he didn't know he was making. "One day, kiddo, we'll help someone else remember how to laugh." And the wind carried it gently away, like the last note of a lullaby no one remembered learning. Clarissa Holt stared at the screen of her laptop like it had personally insulted her. 93 applications, some from Ivy League nannies, others from child psychology graduates, with glowing references, and a few desperate mothers looking for extra income. All polished, articulate, and eager. All of them wrong. She exhaled slowly and leaned back in her chair, letting her head fall against the leather headrest. The rain tapping against the office windows mimicked the rhythm of her thoughts, steady, cold, inescapable. Her office looked nothing like a place where children should live. Marble floors, glass walls, silence. Even the faint ticking of the clock above the fireplace felt too loud. She turned her gaze toward the hallway monitor. Ella and Sophie sat side by side on the rug of the playroom. The twin girls wore matching gray dresses Clarissa hadn't meant for them to match today, but the nanny had insisted it helped with routine. Routine was everything, they said. Stability, structure, predictability. But nothing was predictable with these girls. Not since James died. They weren't angry. They weren't broken. They were just gone. Present in body, absent in spirit. Clarissa had built a billion-dollar company with fewer resources than she'd thrown at this problem. Specialists, therapists, sensory rooms, puppy therapy, color therapy, music therapy, the latest in cognitive behavioral strategies. All of it had amounted to nothing more than silent tears and exhausted nannies. She turned back to the laptop and clicked open the final application number, 94. The file loaded slowly, as if unsure it belonged in the pile. There was no resume attached, just a short email. Plain. No subject line. No logo. No boldface formatting. Just text. Dear Ms. Holt, I don't have a degree in early childhood education. I don't own a clean pair of khakis, and I've never attended a professional nanny seminar, but I do know what it's like to lose everything. I know what silence feels like when it fills a home. And I've learned that sometimes the only thing stronger than words is rhythm. I'm not asking for a job. I'm offering a hand. If you're desperate enough to try something different, I'll be in town this week. Just say when. Sincerely, Ray Dalton, P.S. I have my own blanket, my own speaker, and a daughter who plays ukulele better than I do. Clarissa sat up. Every muscle in her body seemed to lean into the screen. She reread it. Twice. Who was this man? There were no credentials, no recommendations, no license number, just a voice, a deeply human voice, the kind of letter you'd write to someone after a funeral, not after a job posting. She hesitated, then did something uncharacteristic. She stood up, walked across the room, and retrieved her phone from the counter. Not her work phone, not the one managed by 3 assistants. Her personal one, the one that only 2 people had ever called since James died. She typed slowly, "When can you come?" No subject line. No name. Just 3 words. She stared at the screen for a moment, then hit send. The reply came 3 minutes later. "Tomorrow morning." "I don't need directions. Your rhythm is louder than you think." Clarissa frowned. What did that even mean? And yet, her fingers trembled slightly as she set the phone down. The next morning, she told the housekeeper and the interim nanny to take the day off. No explanations. Just, "I'll handle things today." They stared at her, as if she'd lost her mind. Perhaps she had. She didn't tell the girls. Not that they would have responded. They hadn't made eye contact in weeks. They'd barely eaten. She dressed them herself, soft. Pastel leggings, hair brushed, gently matching socks. It was the most maternal thing she'd done in days, maybe weeks. As she stood behind them at the breakfast table slicing apples they wouldn't touch, she heard the faintest sound from the driveway. It wasn't the doorbell. It wasn't a knock. It was music. Acoustic. Slow. A beat that felt like footsteps in water. Like memory. Like something she used to dance to barefoot in the kitchen with James, long before the weight of grief made every floor feel like ice. She moved toward the front door and opened it cautiously. And there he was. Ray Dalton. Faded military green jacket. Long brown hair brushing his shoulders. Holding nothing but a rolled-up white blanket under one arm and a small Bluetooth speaker in the other. No clipboard. No resume. No sales pitch. Just a steady smile, the kind that said, "I've walked through fire and still believe in morning." Clarissa blinked. "You're early." "I'm on time," he said, nodding toward the open door behind her. "They're already listening." Clarissa tilted her head, confused. Ray nodded toward the hallway, where Ella and Sophie were seated quietly, their heads turned slightly toward the distant melody. Clarissa hadn't even realized the music had reached them. Ray stepped inside. No hesitation. No small talk. Just one question. "Do you have a room with a rug and enough space to dance?" She hesitated, then nodded. What followed would stay with her for the rest of her life. But it didn't begin with instructions. It didn't begin with conversation. It began with Ray walking into the playroom like it was a cathedral, unrolling the blanket, placing the speaker in one corner, kneeling slowly so his body became smaller than the silence, and whispering, then, without waiting for permission, he began to move. Slow, grounded, intentional, like a man who had danced through the worst days of his life and come out the other side still willing to move. Ella blinked. Sophie shifted her foot. Clarissa forgot to breathe. This wasn't a performance. It was an invitation. And for the first time in 17 months, the walls of this house heard something more than silence. They heard a heartbeat. Clarissa had never seen her daughters like this. They were still silent, yes, but not in that haunted, heavy way that usually sucked the oxygen from the room. This was different. Ella was sitting upright. Sophie had turned ever so slightly, knees curled beneath her, like a kitten, unsure whether to flee or stay. Both girls had their eyes locked on the man who had entered their lives less than 10 minutes ago. Ray Dalton. He knelt on the rug like a man about to pray, though there was nothing religious about his posture. He didn't reach for them. He didn't ask questions. He simply took out his small Bluetooth speaker, tapped it twice, and let the music begin. A gentle instrumental filled the playroom. It was acoustic light, soothing, the kind of melody you could almost mistake for silence, if not for the way it pulled your chest, open note by note. Clarissa stood in the doorway, arms crossed unconsciously across her chest. Her breath caught somewhere between awe and doubt. Ray didn't speak. Instead, he reached into his backpack and pulled out a large white cloth, folded neatly into a square. He unfurled it slowly, reverently, as though it were something sacred, not just fabric, but memory. Its edges were worn, its center soft from use. She could tell this blanket had held more than just warmth. "My daughter called this the cloud," he said, quietly glancing at Clarissa without breaking the rhythm of his fingers. Said it made her feel like she could float. Then he turned to the girl slowly without pressure and held the cloth in front of him. Ella blinked. Sophie didn't move. He didn't coax. He didn't bribe. He just waited. The music played on. Clarissa wanted to intervene, to say it wasn't going to work, to save him from the awkward failure she was sure was coming. But something in the air stopped her. And then Lily walked in, quiet as moonlight, barefoot, holding her tiny ukulele like it was part of her body. She didn't look at Clarissa. She didn't look at Ray. She walked straight toward the twins and sat down. Sophie's eyes flicked to her, then quickly away. Lily didn't say anything. She just smiled and began to pluck the strings. Not a melody, not even a real song, just sound. Pure, clumsy, honest sound. Ella blinked again. Then something miraculous happened. She leaned forward, just slightly. Just enough for Ray to gently slide the cloth beneath her arms. Still no words, still no sudden movement. But Ella didn't resist. Clarissa covered her mouth with her hand, emotion rising in her chest like water filling a glass too fast. Ray reached for Sophie but stopped halfway, then backed off. It was Lily again who bridged the gap. She shifted her ukulele to one side and gently extended her hand towards Sophie's. At first, nothing. Then, Sophie moved. She slid her hand forward, resting it lightly over Lily's. And just like that, Ray's arms moved. One smooth motion like muscle memory from a life lived in rhythm. He lifted both girls, one already cradled the other, half curious, half afraid, and secured them gently against his back, tucked into the large white sling. Ella's cheek rested between his shoulder blades. Sophie gripped the edge of the fabric, eyes wide, not in fear, but in wonder. Ray stood. He pressed a button on the speaker. The music changed, slightly livelier, still gentle but with a hint of tempo, like wind rustling autumn leaves. And then he danced. Clarissa felt her lungs contract. She didn't realize she was holding her breath until her chest burned. Ray's movements were not exaggerated, not flashy, but graceful, smooth as water over stone. He moved like someone who understood pain, and had chosen to waltz with it anyway. The girls did not cry. They did not squirm. They swayed with him, held close, wrapped safe, their bodies responding instinctively to the cadence of his steps. Lily plucked along, smiling now. Still no words. But music doesn't require them. Clarissa wanted to speak, wanted to ask something, anything, but she couldn't move. She was watching a storm pass. Not a violent one, but the quiet kind. The kind that takes root in the heart, clouds the soul, and lingers long after thunder is gone. And someone was dancing it away. The song ended. Ray stood still in the middle of the room, both girls pressed gently to his back, their eyes slowly closing. Clarissa took one cautious step forward. "How did you—" she began. Ray turned his expression soft but grounded. "I didn't." She tilted her head. "But they chose," he interrupted gently. "I just gave them rhythm when the world gave them silence." Clarissa couldn't stop the tear that slipped down her cheek. She wasn't even sure which emotion birthed it: relief, disbelief, grief, or all of the above. "Do you want to stay for lunch?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Ray smiled. "I'm not here for a job." Clarissa nodded slowly. "Neither am I." They both looked at the girls, now asleep, still wrapped in the cloud, still clinging to a man they had known for less than an hour. But love, Clarissa realized, doesn't need time. It just needs a moment that feels like home. The next morning, the mansion felt different. Clarissa couldn't place it at first, but as she stepped into the playroom with her coffee still steaming in her hand, she realized the air was lighter, not in temperature, in weight. The silence that had long blanketed the home like a shroud had been pierced softly, subtly, but undeniably by the echo of music and something even rarer: hope. Ray was already there, crouched on the floor, spreading out the same white cloth he'd used the day before. Lily sat beside him carefully, unfolding a collection of colored scarves like tiny banners of joy. Each one seemed to shimmer slightly under the golden rays, slicing through the tall windows. Ella and Sophie stood a few feet away, watching, not frozen like usual, but tentative, alert, curious. They hadn't spoken yet. Not words, but their eyes. Their eyes were alive. "Morning," Ray said softly without turning around. Clarissa blinked. "You're early. Rhythm doesn't sleep in," he replied with a wink. She should have been annoyed. She hadn't officially hired him yet. But her lips curved upward before she could stop them. And then she saw it. The blanket. Ray had sewn 2 small pockets into it, soft harnesses of fabric that now held the girl securely to his back, arms tucked around his shoulders, like vines seeking warmth. He stood slowly, gracefully, like a man who had practiced this dance, not once, not twice, but every morning since his daughter was born. Lily tapped the Bluetooth speaker, and it began again. A soft piano lullaby, measured and smooth, floating like dandelion seeds across the polished wood floor. Ray took a step. One foot glided forward, then the other. The girls didn't resist. In fact, Ella giggled. Clarissa nearly dropped her coffee. Again, Daddy Lily whispered from behind the speaker, swaying to the tune. Clarissa leaned against the doorframe, stunned. These were the same twins who had gone months without laughter, who had screamed at every attempt from trained professionals to touch or even approach them, who had curled into themselves like fragile glass, now swaying on a stranger's back, giggling, glowing, and dancing. It wasn't a dance with technique, not like ballet or ballroom. It was the kind of dance that soothed, that wrapped around grief like a warm quilt. The kind of dance that said, "You're not alone in this." "Why the blanket?" Clarissa asked quietly, not wanting to break the spell. Ray turned, his movements fluid, the girls now half laughing into his shoulders. "Lily used to call it her heartbeat ride." He paused. "When she was little, she'd cry for hours unless I carried her close and danced. One night, I had nothing left. No bottle, no lullaby, no energy. So I wrapped her up like this, turned on an old jazz record, and swayed until she fell asleep. She woke up smiling." Clarissa watched his face as he said it. There was no performance in his voice, just memory. "Why dancing?" she asked. He shrugged, adjusting Ella slightly higher on his back. Some people need words to feel understood. Others need rhythm. Clarissa's throat tightened. "And what about you?" Ray looked at her, then really looked. His eyes weren't just kind. They were steady, like the sea after a long storm. "Me," he said. "I guess I just needed someone to dance with." The words hung in the air like perfume, soft, intoxicating, disappearing too soon. Suddenly, Sophie tugged at his shoulder and let out a short hum, almost a syllable. Clarissa stepped forward, eyes wide. Did she? Ray raised one hand without looking back. Not yet. He stopped dancing, turned off the music, and sat down with both girls still wrapped around him. "This is where the magic happens," he whispered. "After the music." In the silence, Clarissa took a cautious step closer, her heels barely making a sound on the rug. Lily walked over to her, holding out a bright orange scarf. "You should try." Clarissa hesitated. "Try what?" dancing, Lily said simply. Clarissa laughed softly, but it caught in her chest. "It's been a long time." Lily looked up with those deep, thoughtful eyes that seemed to hold far more than 6 years of life. "That's why." Clarissa knelt down, accepting the scarf like it was a sacred offering. She didn't know the steps, she didn't know the rhythm. But somehow, as the morning light filtered across her shoulders and the first true smile broke across Sophie's lips. She knew the feeling. She let the scarf trail behind her fingers, then reached for Ella's hand. Not to pull, not to lead, just to be there. And in that moment, as Lily restarted the music and Ray lifted his head to meet Clarissa's eyes, they weren't just people anymore. They were a movement, a father learning to live again, a mother relearning to feel. 3 daughters, each with different wounds, held together by something no doctor could prescribe. A dance, and somewhere in the room, hope exhaled. That night, Clarissa Holt couldn't sleep. She sat upright in her king-sized bed, the silk sheets tangled at her ankles, the windows wide open to the breeze that carried the scent of lilac and rain. Her phone lay untouched on the nightstand. No board meetings, no stock updates, no unread emails, only silence. But it wasn't the same heavy, aching silence that had haunted this house for months. It was a gentler kind of quiet, the kind that follows a lullaby or lingers after a miracle. She wrapped her arms around her knees and stared out into the night. Ella giggled today. It echoed in her mind, like wind chimes, soft, musical, fragile. Sophie had smiled. Lily had offered her a scarf. And Ray, that man, had danced with her children as if he had known their souls in another life. Clarissa pressed her fingers to her temple, breathing in deeply. She wasn't supposed to feel this. She had built her life with walls made of logic, and contracts, with doors that only opened for results. Love was beautiful once, until the day a black car pulled into her driveway and handed her a folded flag and a silence she hadn't known how to live with. And yet, here she was, remembering the way Ray smiled, not the smile of a man trying to impress, but the soft kind, the one a father gives his daughter when she laughs without fear. There had been something in his presence, not flirtation, not pity, something rarer, witness. He didn't just see her daughters, he saw her. Clarissa walked barefoot across the room and opened the closet. She reached to the very back and pulled out a dusty garment bag. It hadn't been touched in 3 years. Her hands trembled as she unzipped it. Inside was her late husband's last gift, a deep green silk dress with a neckline he always said made her look dangerously unstoppable. She had planned to wear it on their anniversary. He died 4 days before it. She hadn't cried at the funeral, hadn't cried when she folded his uniform, not even when the girl stopped speaking. But now, alone in her room, under the cloak of moonlight and memory, Clarissa pressed the dress to her chest and wept, not with restraint, not with shame, but with a sorrow that had been fermenting in silence. Tears rolled down her cheeks like spring rain after a drought. Her sobs came in waves, but they weren't suffocating. They were liberating. She didn't cry because she was broken. She cried because for the first time, something inside her was beginning to heal. Down the hall, a soft thud interrupted her thoughts. Clarissa wiped her face and tiptoed toward the sound. She found Lily barefoot in the kitchen, standing on a step stool, with a cup of warm milk in her hand. The little girl turned, startled. "Sorry," Lily whispered. "Couldn't sleep." Clarissa smiled, her eyes still damp. "Me neither." "You okay?" Clarissa hesitated, then knelt down beside her. "I cried tonight," she said softly. Lily blinked, her expression gentle and unafraid. "That's okay. Daddy says crying is like dancing, but inside." Clarissa laughed through the tears. "He really says that." Lily nodded. "He says it shakes out the pain so joy has room to move in." Clarissa looked into the girl's eyes and saw it that strange, radiant wisdom that some children carry like a secret. She didn't know what life had asked Lily to endure, but it was clear this little girl had learned to turn sorrow into grace. "Do you miss your mom?" Clarissa asked gently. Lily nodded once, solemn. "Every day. But Daddy says she's in our laughter." "That's beautiful," Clarissa murmured. "It's true," Lily said. "And you laughed today. So I think someone you miss came to visit." Clarissa's breath caught in her throat. "Do you think so?" she whispered. Lily nodded again and slid off the stool. She took Clarissa's hand and squeezed it like she was the grown-up now. "Don't be afraid to cry, Miss Clarissa. It means your heart still works." They stood there in silence, the kitchen clock ticking softly, the milk warm between their palms. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Clarissa realized she wasn't afraid. Not of the pain. Not of the memories. Not even of tomorrow. Because now there were people in her home who danced without music, who healed without force, and who loved without asking for anything in return. Ray Dalton didn't come with glowing recommendations or a psychology degree. He came with rhythm, with a daughter who could untangle knots in the soul, with a heart that knew how to hold pain and help it move. Clarissa looked down at Lily and smiled. "Do you want to finish your milk?" Lily shook her head. "I want to dance," Clarissa chuckled. Now. So they did, in the middle of the quiet kitchen. No music, no audience, just the soft shuffle of bare feet on tile, and the steady beat of two hearts remembering what it meant to feel again. The rain had stopped, but the ground still glistened with memories. It was early morning, and the estate was wrapped in a soft fog that made everything feel suspended, in time like the world itself was holding its breath. Inside the sunroom, Ella and Sophie sat cross-legged on a plush rug facing Ray. Each held a silk scarf in her small hands, their eyes locked on his every movement. Clarissa watched from behind the frosted glass door, motionless. She had never seen her daughters like this. Not in therapy, not in school, not even in dreams. They were engaged, present, breathing in rhythm with someone who somehow spoke their language, though he used no words at all. Ray stood before them barefoot, his old green military pants rolled at the ankles, a simple gray t-shirt hanging loose on his frame. The Bluetooth speaker next to him began to hum, and from it poured the soft strains of a cello piece, not loud, not overwhelming, just gentle. Then he moved. Not in grand gestures, just a shift of the shoulders, a subtle sway. He tossed a scarf into the air. Ella caught it with both hands, eyes widening. Sophie mimicked him, lifting her own scarf and letting it twirl above her head. Their hands began to follow his, then their torsos, then their feet. No one spoke. But a conversation was happening, a fluent, flowing dance between trauma and trust. Clarissa's breath caught in her throat. She remembered the countless therapists who tried puppets, flashcards, candy rewards, the speech specialists with degrees and accolades. All of them had treated her daughters like puzzles to be solved, but Ray treated them like music waiting to be heard. He bowed slightly and motioned with a finger, not commanding, inviting. Ella stood. Sophie hesitated. Then Lily walked in, ukulele in hand, her presence as unassuming as always. She sat beside Sophie and plucked a soft, childlike tune. Sophie's eyes met hers, and then Sophie stood. Clarissa gasped. No one else would have thought it a miracle, but to her, it was resurrection. Ray began to turn in slow circles, raising his arms like wings, and the girls followed. 3 bodies, different sizes, moving as one. Not perfectly, not in sync, but together. Clarissa didn't notice the tears falling until Lily turned her head and gave her a small, knowing smile. That child. She was the soul of a whisper. Later that day, Clarissa asked Ray about what he had done. They sat in the garden, the girls playing nearby, drawing chalk rainbows on the stone path. "You don't push them to speak," she observed. "No," Ray said simply. "I listen to what they're already saying." Clarissa tilted her head. "But they don't talk. Doesn't mean they're not speaking." He looked over at the twins and continued. "Movement is language. Silence is language. Trauma speaks loudest in the places we ignore." Clarissa exhaled slowly. "You say that like you've lived it." Ray smiled a bit sadly. "I served 3 tours in the Middle East. I've seen boys younger than Lily lose everything and still find a way to sing through rubble." He leaned back. "Sometimes, we just need permission to move again." Clarissa didn't answer. She just watched her daughters and realized how little she had truly seen them before. That evening after dinner, Ray announced something new. "From tomorrow, we're going to have a silent dance hour every afternoon." Clarissa blinked. "Isn't every hour already a silent hour with them?" Ray chuckled. "Not for long." The next day at 3 p.m. sharp, the sunroom transformed. Scarves were tied to wrists. Mirrors were covered with fabric. No one was allowed to speak. Instead, they danced. Every day, one child got to choose the music. Sometimes it was classical, sometimes jazz. One day, Lily picked a weird, bouncy electronic beat that made everyone laugh. But what mattered wasn't the genre, it was the freedom. Ella began to giggle mid-spin. Sophie started humming under her breath. By the end of the week, the twins were mouthing the lyrics to an old lullaby Clarissa hadn't sung since their father's funeral. And then it happened. It was a Tuesday. The fog had rolled back in. Ray had just queued up an instrumental track when Sophie paused mid-movement. She turned to Ray, touched his sleeve, and whispered, barely audible, "Again." Clarissa dropped her coffee mug. Shards of porcelain scattered across the kitchen tiles, but she didn't care. She had heard it. A word. A real word. From her daughter's lips. Ray didn't react dramatically. He didn't stop the music. He simply smiled and started the track over. Ella followed suit the next day with a stuttered, "Me too." And so it began, not a storm of language, but a soft rain of syllables that grew with each dance, each laugh, each breath. Later that week, Clarissa found a drawing taped to her bedroom door. Crayons, sloppy shapes, but unmistakable 4-stick figures. 3 little girls, 1 tall man in the middle. Above their heads a rainbow, and 2 words scribbled in shaky child handwriting, "Dance Family." Clarissa held the paper to her chest and wept not from grief, but from gratitude. Her daughters weren't cured, not yet. But they were moving again, speaking, smiling, and dancing toward something that looked a lot like hope. The world didn't change in grand, sweeping gestures. It changed in whispers, in sticky fingers offering a shared cookie, in crayon scribbles placed beside a stranger's teacup, in a girl named Lily, walking barefoot through a house once frozen in silence. Clarissa noticed it first in the way the morning light followed Lily. The girl seemed to glow in a quiet, unassuming way, never demanding attention, never performing yet, somehow, orchestrating harmony wherever she went. That Sunday morning, as Clarissa entered the kitchen, she found Lily seated at the breakfast island with Ella and Sophie. The twins each held a half-peeled banana, while Lily carefully balanced a small plate of waffles between them like it was a crown jewel. None of the girls spoke, but they didn't need to. Ella broke a piece of her waffle, placed it on Lily's napkin. Sophie mimicked her. Lily giggled softly, scrunching her nose like she had just discovered treasure, and Clarissa, who once believed motherhood was something you had to lead, stood quietly, learning what it meant to simply witness. Ray was on the porch, fixing the broken hinge of a rocking chair. Clarissa approached slowly, her eyes still on the kitchen scene behind her. "Your daughter," she said softly, "has this gift." Ray didn't look up. "She doesn't know she's different." "No," Clarissa said more to herself. "She just makes others feel like they're the same." He finally glanced at her, wiping his hands on a towel. "That's the only kind of magic I believe in." Later that day, it rained. Not the wild storm kind of rain, but a soft, steady drizzle that turned the backyard into a mirror of puddles and dancing drops. Clarissa assumed the girls would stay inside, but Lily had other plans. She tiptoed into the living room with a mischievous twinkle in her eye and tugged at Clarissa's sleeve. "Can we go outside?" Clarissa hesitated. "It's wet." Lily grinned. "Exactly." Moments later, all three girls were out in the garden barefoot and squealing as they ran through the grass, mud squelching beneath them, arms raised to the sky like miniature sunflowers catching raindrops. Clarissa watched, mouth slightly agape. She remembered Ella's fear of mud, Sophie's panic at getting her dress wet. But here, they were completely drenched, completely alive. Ray leaned beside her at the doorway, holding 2 mugs of tea. "You okay?" he asked. Clarissa nodded, then paused. "You ever feel like you're watching someone else's dream?" Ray chuckled, handing her a mug. "Every single day since I met you." That evening, the fireplace crackled with a warmth that wasn't just from wood. Clarissa sat on the floor, legs crossed with Lily curled up beside her. Ella and Sophie were on either side of Ray, each holding a coloring book. The living room, once museum-like in its perfection, now had signs of life, a misplaced sock, an open puzzle box, a pink stuffed elephant left upside down. Lily Clarissa asked softly, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" The little girl looked up, thoughtful. "A tree." Clarissa blinked. "A tree." Lily nodded seriously. "They listen, and they don't move unless it really matters." Ray chuckled. "She's been saying that since she was 3. Clarissa felt her throat tighten. In that moment, she realized Lily wasn't just a daughter. She was a healer. A quiet balm on wounds even Clarissa hadn't admitted to having. Over the following days, Lily began doing something that made Clarissa's heart ache in the most unexpected way. She brought her things. First, it was a small seashell with a hole in the middle. "You can hear the ocean, even if it's not there," Lily explained. Then came a folded piece of paper with stick figures, Clarissa, Ray, and the 3 girls all holding hands beneath a tree labeled home. And one morning, Lily entered the study with a tray of warm toast, and Honey placed it carefully beside Clarissa's computer, then kissed her on the arm without a word. Clarissa couldn't remember the last time she'd been kissed that way, without reason, without condition. That night, she cried again, not because she was sad, but because she was starting to believe she might not always be. One afternoon, as Clarissa worked on her laptop near the bay window, she overheard the girls in the sunroom. Lily was speaking slowly, as if narrating a story. "This is the kingdom where no one talks, but everyone dances. And this," she said, placing Ella's hand over her heart, "is how you say, 'Thank you' in the kingdom." Clarissa turned and peeked through the door. Ella's hand remained over her chest. Then she nodded. "The thank." She whispered the word, crumbling as it formed. Clarissa gasped. Sophie looked stunned. Lily just smiled and replied, "That's perfect." Clarissa fell back into the chair, breath stolen from her lungs. Her daughters were healing, but not through force, not through lectures or therapy sessions or money. They were healing through presence, through a little girl who never asked for anything but gave everything. That night, Clarissa tucked Lily into the guest room bed. Before turning off the light, she hesitated. "Lily," she whispered, "do you think your mom would have been proud of you?" Lily's eyes fluttered sleepily, but her voice was clear. "Daddy says she dances in the stars now. And when I'm kind, she sparkles more." Clarissa closed her eyes, fighting back the tears. "You make her shine very bright, sweetheart." Lily smiled. "You do too. When you laugh." Clarissa stepped into the hallway, hand covering her mouth. She didn't laugh often. But perhaps she would start. It was supposed to be a normal Tuesday afternoon. The sky was clear. The scent of lemon bars drifted from the kitchen. Clarissa was reviewing quarterly reports in her study, and Ray was out back, building a wooden birdhouse with the girls. Sophie was painting tiny red dots on the roof, her tongue sticking out in focus. Ella was humming. Yes, actually humming, while Lily gently tapped her ukulele, strumming random chords that somehow still felt like a song. Clarissa leaned on the windowsill, quietly observing the scene through the glass. She had never imagined this day would come. That laughter would echo off these walls again. That her daughters, once so still, so unreachable, would begin to move like wind in soft grass. But sometimes, healing stirs the dust before it settles. And healing, like weather, can change in a breath. That night, they decided to have a movie in the grand hall, a rare treat. Clarissa wanted to celebrate how far the girls had come. Popcorn was made. Blankets were laid out in a fort across the marble floor. Ray set up the projector, and Clarissa chose an animated film about flying adventures. Then it happened. 30 minutes into the movie, a helicopter appeared on screen. Loud whirring, spinning. Its sound design was too real, too sharp. Sophie froze. Her hands clenched. Her breathing grew rapid. Then she screamed, a high, piercing cry that split the silence like a blade. She bolted from the blanket fort, knocking over a lamp in her panic, sobbing uncontrollably as she ran down the hallway, arms flailing, feet bare, voice hoarse with terror. Ella stood in place, paralyzed. Lily tried to call after her, but was too stunned to move. Clarissa's blood ran cold. Ray was the first to react. He didn't shout. He didn't chase. He walked firm and steady into the hallway, where Sophie had collapsed against the wall, rocking back and forth, her face buried in her arms. Clarissa followed, heart pounding. "Ray, what do we?" He raised one finger gently, not to silence her, but to ask for space. Then he did something Clarissa would never forget. He sat cross-legged on the cold marble floor a few feet from Sophie and slowly pulled out his phone. He tapped it once. Music began, a familiar cello and piano duet, soft, warm, almost like a lullaby wrapped in velvet. Ray didn't say a word. He just began to sway. Not dramatically, not even enough to call it dancing yet. Just a subtle rocking motion, back and forth, side to side. He closed his eyes and let the rhythm hold him as if he too were broken, and the music was his only anchor. Sophie's sobs continued, but quieter. Clarissa watched, frozen in awe, Every instinct in her said to intervene, to do something. But she couldn't take her eyes off Ray. Then without warning, he scooted just a little closer to Sophie, still swaying, still silent. He placed one palm face up on the floor between them, an invitation. No demand. Sophie peeked up, her lashes wet cheeks blotchy. Ray didn't open his eyes. The music played on. And then, like watching the sun emerge from storm clouds, Sophie reached out, fingers trembling, and touched his hand. Ray opened his eyes, smiled faintly, and gave her fingers the gentlest squeeze. Then he stood, bringing her with him. Still swaying, he stepped back, guiding her gently. Sophie followed. One step, then another. Clarissa covered her mouth. They were dancing. From behind, Ella emerged holding Lily's hand. Wordlessly, they joined the hallway. The four of them, Ray, Sophie, Ella, and Lily, moved slowly in a circle. Nothing rehearsed, just a current of comfort, music, and movement. Clarissa felt the air shift, not in the room, in her soul. Tears fell freely. She remembered that sound, that exact model of helicopter. It was the same one that carried her husband into the sky and never brought him back. For so long that memory had haunted her girls. She had tried therapists, noise machines, even silence. But it was this sacred unscripted dance in a hallway that finally pierced the wall. Sophie leaned her head against Ray's side chest, rising and falling in rhythm. Ella whispered something in Lily's ear. Lily nodded, then turned to Clarissa and held out her hand. "You too." Clarissa hesitated. "I don't know how to dance like that," she said, voice shaking. Lily smiled gently. "You don't have to. Just move where it feels warm." So Clarissa joined them. 5 bodies, 1 circle, no choreography, just grace. Ray didn't lead, and no one followed. They simply were. The hallway, once a place of hurried footsteps and business calls, became a sanctuary. No words, no diagnoses, no expectations, only movement, only healing. Later that night, after the girls were asleep, Clarissa stood beside the same hallway. She stared at the spot on the floor where Sophie had collapsed, and then at the scuff marks left by their barefoot dance. Ray entered, holding 2 cups of tea. As always. "You okay?" he asked. Clarissa took a long breath. "You didn't ask her what was wrong." Ray shrugged. "Sometimes kids don't need questions, just rhythm." She turned toward him. "And what if the rhythm stops?" He smiled. "Then we teach them to hum." Clarissa laughed quietly. And in that moment, in that hallway of echoes, she knew she wasn't just grateful. She was changing. The late autumn sun was beginning to set, spilling gold and honey over the sprawling backyard of the Holt estate. A soft breeze rustled through the trees, scattering amber leaves like quiet confetti across the lawn. The backyard no longer felt like a monument to emptiness. It pulsed now with games, laughter, life. Clarissa sat on the wooden porch steps, a steaming cup of chamomile tea in her hands. Her eyes traced the movement in front of her, like a dream she couldn't quite believe was real. Lily was giggling, her long hair flying behind her, as she chased Ella and Sophie around the oak tree. The girls were shrieking with joy, a far cry from the silence that once imprisoned them. Every few seconds, they would fall into each other, rolling in the leaves, their dresses stained and spirits uncontained. And in the center of it all stood Ray. His sleeves rolled up his arms, wide open, pretending to be a monster who just couldn't quite catch them. His deep, booming roar was more music than menace, the kind of joyful growl only a good father could pull off. Clarissa watched the scene unfold with something she hadn't felt in years: lightness. Not just relief, not just gratitude, but an unbearable, exquisite lightness in her chest. She was falling, not just into routine, Not just into healing, into him. Later, as the sky darkened into indigo, and the girls lay curled up together under a shared blanket on the swing bench, Ray joined Clarissa on the porch. He sat beside her close enough that their shoulders almost touched, but not quite. He respected space the way musicians respected silence between notes. It wasn't absence, it was intention. Clarissa glanced sideways at him. "They love you," she said softly. Ray chuckled. "Well, they love being chased and growled at. I'm not sure that counts." "It does, especially for kids who used to flinch at the sound of their own names." He looked down quiet. "Lily taught me," he said, "that when a child trusts you enough to laugh near you, that's the whole world coming back." They sat for a long moment, the only sounds being crickets and the soft rustling of the blanket swing. Then Clarissa spoke, almost without thinking. "My husband used to say, if anyone could make our girls laugh again, he'd marry them on the spot." She said it with a dry smile, a wistful lilt. But when she turned, Ray wasn't laughing. He was. Still. Eyes fixed ahead, hands clasped loosely between his knees. Clarissa felt her breath catch. "I didn't mean that as a, I know," he said quietly. Then he turned to face her, his voice deep steady. "But if he were here, I'd shake his hand and tell him. He raised warriors, and he loved like a giant." Clarissa blinked, eyes glassy. Ray leaned back, slightly offering her space again, a chance to retreat. But she didn't. She reached out and placed her hand gently over his. "What about you, Ray Dalton?" she whispered. "What would you say to a woman who once forgot how to cry and now can't stop smiling every time she sees you with her children?" Ray met her gaze. His voice was rough with emotion. "I'd say, maybe dancing with their hearts is the easy part. But dancing with yours, that might take every step I've got left." Clarissa laughed soft and surprised and shook her head. "You always do that. What turned pain into poetry?" Ray looked at her for a long time. Then ever so gently he said, "I don't write poems, Clarissa. I just listen to the silence between the words. That's where people really speak." They sat there, the porch light flickering above them, casting golden rings around their silhouettes, like a quiet blessing. Inside, one of the girls stirred. Lily peeked out from the swing bench, rubbing her eyes. "Daddy," she called, sleep-laced. Ray stood instantly, his body moving with the automatic precision of a man who had answered every midnight cry since his wife died. "Coming, sweetheart." Clarissa watched him walk toward the swing tuck, the blanket higher around the girls, press a kiss on Lily's forehead. He didn't try to be tender. He just was. When he returned, Clarissa was still watching him. "You'd make a very good husband, you know." Ray raised an eyebrow, mock serious. "Are you proposing, Ms. Holt?" She smirked. "If I do, it won't be with a ring." No, she said. "It'll be with a promise." Ray folded his arms. "And what promise is that?" She stepped closer now, her voice barely a breath. "That I'll never ask you to stop dancing, even on the bad days, especially on the bad days." There was no kiss, no sweeping gesture, only the quiet acknowledgement between two people who had weathered their own storms and finally found shelter together. The morning of the twins' birthday arrived not with balloons or loud music, but with the soft aroma of fresh cinnamon rolls and a golden ribbon of light spilling across the hardwood floor of the Holt kitchen. Clarissa had insisted on keeping it small. No media, no grand guest list, just the people who had brought her daughters back to life. Outside, the backyard had been quietly transformed. A single long picnic table sat beneath a canopy of fairy lights and hanging paper lanterns gently swaying in the breeze. A pale blue banner hand-painted by Lily hung above it, crooked and endearing, "Happy birthday, Ella and Sophie." We're glad you're here. Ray had built a little wooden stage from leftover crates the night before. Nothing fancy, just enough for Lily's ukulele and a Bluetooth speaker. The plan was simple. No speeches, no pressure. Just joy if it decided to show up. And it did. Ella and Sophie wore matching white sundresses and flower crowns Lily had woven with Clarissa. Their hair, once always tied tight or hidden behind their mother's anxiety, flowed free today. They didn't just walk, they skipped their bare feet, brushing the grass hands held together like they were born dancing. Mommy Sophie whispered, tugging at Clarissa's skirt as the music began to play. "Can we show him?" Clarissa blinked, kneeling slowly. "Show who baby Dada Ray." It was the first time she'd heard them say his name with such belonging. Show him what Ella stepped forward, her eyes shining. The dance. Ray looked up from where he was helping Lily tune her ukulele. He caught the sparkle in Clarissa's teary eyes before the twins pulled at his hands. They led him to the center of the grass under the old oak tree. Then, with a whispered countdown, they began. It wasn't a real choreography. It was chaos, wrapped in rhythm, spinning, hopping arms, flailing with glee. But Ray matched them step for step, like he was fluent in their wild, wordless language. Clarissa laughed, not politely, not gently. She laughed a full-throated, hand-over-her-heart kind of laugh as she watched the man she never saw coming lead her daughters in a celebration of everything they had almost lost. Lily joined them next, then Clarissa reluctantly, then all at once. The four of them twirled in the fading light, like no one was watching. Because for once, no one was. Just the wind. And the sky. And maybe Clarissa thought someone watching from above. Later that evening, the cake was sliced under soft golden lanterns. Frosting clung to cheeks and noses. Laughter spilled out like music from every corner of the backyard. But it was what happened just before bedtime that Clarissa would remember forever. Ray had just finished putting away the plates. He returned to the porch where Clarissa was sipping the last of her lemonade, gazing up at the moon. "They're down," he said quietly. "Out cold." Birthday success, she smiled. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small velvet pouch. "This was my husband's," she said. He never liked rings, but he kept this on him every day after we got engaged. She opened it to reveal a small wooden heart, carved with tiny initials, C+D. "You don't have to take it," she said. I want you to know I believe in miracles again." Ray didn't speak. He took the heart and turned it in his hands. "Your girls," he said, finally, voice thick. "They healed something in me I didn't know was still broken. And Lily healed something in me I didn't know was still missing," Clarissa added. They stood in silence for a moment, the kind of silence that holds more than words ever could. Then, from behind them, a small voice broke the hush. "Daddy," they turned. Sophie, barefoot and half asleep, stood at the doorway. "Can I say it again?" Ray knelt slowly. "Of course, sweetheart." Sophie walked over and wrapped her tiny arms around his neck. "Happy birthday, Daddy," she whispered. And then the word repeated, but not from Sophie. It came from Ella, still groggy, holding Lily's hand. "Daddy," she echoed, clear, soft, certain. Clarissa gasped, covering her mouth. Lily didn't say a word. She just squeezed Clarissa's hand, her eyes shimmering in the porch light. Ray didn't respond with words. He simply held out his arms, and the girls ran into them like the world had finally made room for their voices. Clarissa turned her face upward. There, just above the tree line, the first star blinked awake. And for the first time in years, she wished. Not for money. Not for success. But for the courage to ask the question already forming on her lips. A question not about business or logic. A question of the heart. But not tonight. Tonight was for dancing. And dancing didn't need words. The kitchen was quiet, except for the soft clinking of ceramic. Outside, the garden still held traces of laughter from the twins' birthday, the wilting paper lanterns, a single forgotten balloon drifting along the fence, and a ukulele string still reverberating in the wind like a memory that refused to fade. Clarissa stood barefoot at the sink, her hands in warm, soapy water. She wasn't washing dishes. Not really. She just needed the warmth. Needed to stay grounded because her heart, since that night, had taken flight and refused to land. She looked over her shoulder. Ray was sitting at the dining table with a steaming mug in his hands. Shoulders relaxed gaze, soft, as he watched Lily sketch something on a napkin. Ella and Sophie were napping in the den, curled up together like kittens after a storm. For the first time in years, everything in the house felt like it belonged. Not leased, not borrowed, not staged for some magazine interview. Belonged. And that frightened Clarissa more than she expected. Love was the one currency she'd never truly learned to trade in. Deals. She could close them in her sleep. Losses. She wore them like armor. But this quiet kind of love that didn't demand anything in return was terrifying. She dried her hands, took a breath, and walked toward him. Ray. He looked up, his smile immediate. That smile, the one that didn't just curl lips, but softened the lines of a man who had seen too much and somehow still believed in joy. Hey. You all right? I don't want tea, she said. He chuckled, gesturing toward the empty chair beside him. That's okay. I made enough awkward small talk with Lily to cover both of us. Clarissa sat down, her fingers grazing the edge of the table. There were crayon marks all over it now, a few scratches from dropped forks. She didn't mind. In fact, she loved it. She looked up at him, not smiling, not playing, just being. Raw, present. I have a question, she said quietly. Ray set his mug down. Shoot. But she didn't speak right away, because this wasn't the kind of question you just asked. It was one that hovered behind ribs, one that needed air and silence and the absence of fear to finally take shape. Clarissa turned, slightly facing him more directly. The woman who once commanded boardrooms now looked like a girl asking to be believed. It's not for today. Or tomorrow. Maybe not even next year. Okay. But if I were to ask. She hesitated, then went on. If I asked you to dance with me, not at a party, not for a show, but in the quiet of a messy kitchen, or on a rainy Tuesday, or in front of children with chocolate on their faces. Ray's face didn't move, but his eyes, oh, they widened with the weight of understanding. Would you, she finished, her voice trembling just slightly, would you say yes to that kind of dance? The everyday kind? There was no music playing, no audience, no spotlights, but in the moment that followed, something ancient passed between them. Not attraction, not even affection, recognition. Of two souls bruised but breathing, two hearts that had learned to beat in silence and now found themselves learning to make music again. Ray stood up slowly, as if standing in a church. He extended his hand. Now's as good a time as any, he said softly. Clarissa hesitated. Ray. I didn't mean I know, he nodded. But I've never been good at waiting for the perfect moment. I've missed too many that way. She took his hand, and they danced. Right there in the middle of her kitchen, next to a stack of drying dishes and a spilled box of cereal to no music at all. They danced, not for rhythm, not for grace, but for the sheer miracle that they still could. Clarissa laughed, surprised at how much her body remembered how it swayed without instruction, how her feet trusted his, even though her heart was still learning. Ray pulled her a little closer. You don't have to ask me next year, he whispered near her ear. You already have my answer. She pulled back slightly, her eyes searching his. "And what is it?" He smiled. "Yes, to the everyday dance, to the chaos, to the chocolate fingerprints on the glass doors. Yes, to all of it." Later that evening, Clarissa found herself sitting on the porch steps while Ray read a bedtime story inside. Lily came and nestled beside her, handing her the napkin she had been drawing on earlier. It was a crude sketch of 5 stick figures: Ray, Clarissa, Ella, Sophie, and Lily, all holding hands under a lopsided roof, with a big heart above them. "It's our house," Lily said. Clarissa's voice caught. "Is it?" Lily nodded. "Not the place. The people. That's what my dad says." Clarissa wrapped her arm around the girl. "He's a smart man. He's a good dancer, too," Lily added with a giggle. Clarissa smiled, then looked up at the stars just beginning to pierce the night sky. She thought about all the questions she used to ask about balance sheets, expansion plans, succession strategy. None of them mattered now. There was only one question left worth asking. And tonight, without even needing to say it, she got her answer. The first sound that filled the house that morning wasn't the whir of the espresso machine, nor the distant hum of Clarissa's morning conference calls. It was laughter. Not just giggles, but full-bodied, belly-aching, nose-snorting laughter that spilled from the upstairs hallway like sunlight through open shutters. Clarissa paused mid-step on the staircase, barefoot, holding a laundry basket. For a moment, she didn't move. She simply stood there and let it wash over her. That sound, their sound, was once extinct in this house. For years it had been replaced by silence, by sterile quiet and forced pleasantries. But now, it pulsed, like a heartbeat. Downstairs, Ray was whistling something he did when he cooked, fixed the leaky pipe under the sink, or simply stood looking out the window with a mug in hand. Clarissa had learned his moods through that whistle. Sometimes upbeat jazz, sometimes a slow ballad, sometimes a lullaby only Lily would recognize. Today, it was a waltz. Clarissa followed the melody to the kitchen, where the table was already cluttered with bowls of oatmeal, a half-sliced banana, and a ukulele lying across a storybook. Ray looked up, hair still wet from a rushed shower, and gave her that smile. The one that said, "Yes, life is a mess, but it's a beautiful mess, isn't it? They're building a fort," he said, nodding upstairs. "It's very serious business. Might need diplomatic intervention." "Did they use all the pillows again?" Clarissa asked, placing the laundry basket down. "All the pillows, and 2 kitchen chairs, and the dog bed. Even though we don't have a dog." Clarissa chuckled, then stepped closer, taking a sip of the coffee he had just poured for her, without asking. He always remembered how she liked it. Black, no sugar, but just shy of bitter. "What time's the meeting today?" Ray asked. "Cancelled," she said simply. "Big deal. Big enough to not matter anymore." He gave a soft nod, understanding. Over the last few weeks, she had quietly started handing off more CEO duties. The board didn't question her. They saw what everyone was beginning to see. Clarissa Holt wasn't stepping down. She was stepping into something. Into motherhood. Into music. Into sunlit breakfasts and muddy shoe prints and dinner conversations about worms and crayons. Into love. Just then, Lily ran in her braid, swinging wildly. "Mom," she said, breathless. Clarissa blinked. It wasn't the first time Lily had called her that. But it still hit her like the first. She bent down and opened her arms wide. "Hey, sweetheart." Lily crashed into her with all the force of a 6-year-old tornado. Behind her came Ella and Sophie, dragging a blanket and a flashlight. "There's a monster in the fort," Ella whispered. "It has 3 heads and smells like bacon," Sophie added seriously. "That's because your dad just burned the bacon." Lily grinned. "I did not." Ray called from behind the stove. Clarissa turned, laughing. You kind of did. He held up the pan, unapologetic. It's called extra crispy. Gourmet style. They all gathered around the kitchen island, then 5 people who months ago had been 5 separate planets. Orbits broken. Hearts walled off. Now they were gravity for each other. Clarissa stood behind Ray, wrapping her arms around his waist as he flipped pancakes with exaggerated flair. What would you have done, she whispered, if I never answered your letter? He tilted his head slightly, still focused on the pan. I would have written another one. And another. As many as it took. She closed her eyes, letting her cheek rest against his back. She remembered that letter. Handwritten. Slightly crooked lines. Ink smudged at the corner. I don't have degrees. I don't have techniques. I just have music in my bones, and a daughter who taught me that sometimes healing begins with rhythm. That letter didn't just change her life. It rebuilt it. After breakfast, Ray took the girls into the yard to tend the tiny herb garden they had started. Clarissa watched from the porch. Lily was showing Ella how to prune basil. Sophie held a watering can twice her size. Ray knelt beside them, explaining how mint could take over the whole garden if you weren't careful. Like joy, he said. If you let it grow wild, it'll surprise you. Clarissa sat there barefoot on the wooden steps, hands wrapped around her coffee mug. This was not the life she imagined when she built empires and acquired companies. It was better. There were no closing bells here, no market predictions, no quarterly reports, only moments ordinary and magnificent. Later that evening, as twilight descended, Clarissa found herself alone in the living room. The twins were in bed. Lily had fallen asleep with a book half open on her chest. Ray was still outside checking the mailbox. She wandered to the record player. A gift from Ray, one of those vintage models with a warm hum and a slightly scratchy sound that made even silence feel musical. She placed a record on and let the needle fall. The room filled with soft strings, an old waltz they had danced to once in the kitchen, surrounded by spilled cereal and love unsaid. Ray walked in a moment later, mail in hand, and froze. Clarissa turned. Dance with me. He didn't answer. He just walked over, took her hand, and pulled her close. And they danced. Not perfectly, not even in sync, but joyfully, willfully, gratefully. Because some dances weren't about choreography. They were about presence. They were about saying, I'm here with you. Still. Always. The twins slept peacefully upstairs. Lily mumbled something in her dream and rolled over, hugging her stuffed bunny. Ray and Clarissa held each other, the song fading into silence. And for the first time in years, the house didn't feel big. It felt full. Not of noise, but of rhythm, of heartbeat, of home. We'd love to know where in the world are you watching from. Drop your city or state in the comments below. It means so much to see how far stories like this can reach. If this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to our channel. We share uplifting tales of love, healing, and the quiet strength of everyday heroes, and we'd be honored to have you with us on this journey. Thank you for spending your precious time with us. Your support helps keep these soul-stirring stories alive, stories that remind us that sometimes all it takes is a little kindness and a dance.